I remember when I was very young watching a film that I was way, way, way too young for. When I say very young, probably, I don't know, early teens, maybe 10, 11. And it was an anime film. And there were these great big, awesome robots fighting each other. And there were these really interesting heroes with great big swords. I remember playing video games where you were fighting in a dungeon and your opponents were great big demons. Diablo, I'm looking at you. I remember playing role-playing games where you were in some kind of battle suit dealing with interesting and similarly adorned foes. I remember reading books about sword and shield, but it's not very often you get all those together. So I often wondered what it would be like to be a colorful sword-wielding hero fighting against these demonic creatures that have just climbed up the granite walls with glyph encrusted and there to ruin your day. It's time to talk about Hellguard. Oh my God, here we are with Max and Mikael. That was a terrible intro.
I liked it. I was on the edge of my seat.
I know.
I'm glad.
I love it.
And the granite glyph thing that you slipped in there, that was great.
There you go. Artful.
See, I've been practicing all minute. Max, Mikael, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited about this project.
Thanks
so
for
cool.
having us. Glad to be here.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it already, we actually did a bit of a deep dive on your Kickstarter campaign a couple of weeks ago. Please, if you're watching and you enjoyed that or you enjoy this, then please do like and subscribe and all that stuff and check out that Kickstarter campaign. Well, that's what we're going to talk about, right? So, yeah.
That was fun to see them mentioned. We dropped by, I remember, during that video.
You did.
A lot of fun.
You did.
A little
that
cameo.
Was a surprise. Now you're here.
Yeah, it's incredible how far we've come.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You've joined the Discord and everything. It only gets worse.
Downhill.
Discord is open, by the way. The link will be down below if you're watching on YouTube. Or if you're listening onto a future podcast, then it'll be in the show notes. Yeah. Thank you for joining. Tell me about Hellguard.
Oh my gosh. All right. Mikael, do you want to take the first swing or should I? I'm
sure. So Hellguard is it is a one-night RPG, but it's also so much more than that. It's actually a series of one-shots, and it gives you tools to create others. And the idea is that it is sort of heavy on flavor, light on rules. You've heard that before with other games, I'm sure. But it's also kind of about high accessibility. We wanted to give people who are pressed for time the ability to play games. We wanted to give people who are intimidated by large rule sets the ability to play this game. And we also wanted to give people who don't have access to a ton of horror games because they're playing longer form sort of light fantasy games to get in on something like this. So it's set in a dark fantasy world. It's inspired by things like Diablo and Castlevania and sort of like the investigative portions of Call of Cthulhu. And it is like the nacho cheese Dorito of role-playing games. So much flavor packed into such a small little space.
Like the only Dorito that's worth eating, basically. I think you've hit the nail on the head. So I've said this many times on our show, that I cut my teeth not with Dungeons and Dragons, not with Call of Cthulhu, not with RuneQuest, but actually with Vampire the Masquerade. And that was the first, my first foray into role-playing. Going back to the 90s, basically. And I guess I've always been chasing that. I'm more interested in the story than I am in, measuring the squares between your players and worrying about that. And certainly for me, I found that over the years, I've been doing more and more rules light stuff. And it's quite challenging, even with rules light. If you've only got 10 words on a page, for example, to flesh that all out. And a lot of rules light games are so rules light that all they have in the game really is a bit of setting and some rules, and then away you go. There you go. That's it. You're done.
Some keyword,
which is wonderful.
On your way.
exactly, which is wonderful. But I tell you what, this isn't my only job, right? And I don't get paid for this one. And I don't have a lot of time at the end, the end of the day, to think about bad ideas for role-playing games and stories. So yeah, it sounds like, and perhaps you can elaborate more on this, but it sounds like what you've done is you've taken the essence of a storytelling game, and then you've gone one step further, and you're actually thinking, which stories should we tell, and how do we tell them? So what's the general flavor?
Boy,
apart from nacho cheese.
Apart from nacho cheese, it's the only game worth playing, right? No. We've kind of, we've been kitschy and we've dubbed it infernal fantasy or a technicolor infernal fantasy, right? That's
right.
A dark fantasy, not grimdark like Warhammer maybe, where it's a little more tongue in cheek and the depressing state of the world is the joke, right? But something more akin to like Dante Alighieri's, Dante's Inferno, right? Combined with some of the incredible high-flying, even American anime we've seen on Netflix recently, The Witcher, Castlevania, Dota, all these incredible shows. It's funny you mentioned counting out squares on a grid. I would love to count out squares on a grid in a game about combat. The problem is movement tends not to matter in those games too, right? I mean, so many of these C20 systems, you're encouraged and rewarded to run up to the bad guy, and then you take turns hitting each other until someone's dead, right?
Yeah, in fact, running away is never, very rarely a good idea, because then you get hit anyway.
Yeah, you're gonna get punished with an attack of opportunity if you try to run, right?
Yeah.
So you
spend your turn not attempting to hit them.
It doesn't tend to deliver on the promise of high-flying anime-inspired combat where movement is everything. You're running up walls and darting across. Dragon Ball Z, you would punch people through mountains as you traveled with them, right? So where's that? Where's that in our combat? It's not there. So we desperately tried, and I feel like we've succeeded in delivering that here with Hellguard. Movement isn't punished. All of your abilities work every single time. You're rolling damage. You're not rolling to hit. It's just a matter of setting up combos with your allies. It's a matter of using the environment. Torvald with his molten hook might drag an enemy into his reach, do this crazy 360 whirlwind attack, and then he's about to get jumped. So Gwyn the Knight, right, can teleport to his side, protect him, and then charge the enemy across the battlefield into a wall, right?
So
and you'll have these cool alley-oops, these cool, incredible combos that happen, which we just love. So
that's so cool. Tell me about your inspiration, how you got together and made this leap from playing to hey, let's build this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Max and I, it's almost a joke kind of in our circle of friends that every night...
Wait, you have friends?
Yeah, believe it or not.
I think you're doing this thing wrong.
We won't, after the amount of play testing we put him through, we won't have him for long, but we'll enjoy him now.
Good point. But every night around like 7 p.m. or so, we would log on to an online game and we would start having like philosophical debates about role-playing games. And whether, even if it wasn't online, we would like meet up for milk tea or something and talk in person about it.
Yeah.
And it kind of got to the point where we were talking about what makes a good game, what would we do differently, how can we hack the systems that we're currently playing, and the idea was like, oh well, we should maybe like make something at some point. We're like, when are we ever going to be chained to our computers for such a long stretch of time that like it would, that we would ever find the time to do something like this? And then March 2020 rolls around. So
and you're like, yes. I've been waiting for this time for so long.
But we did make the best of a pretty grim situation, and we found ourselves, anchored to our computers for work, so much as it was, and unable to meet in person. That one of the best uses of our times was to log on to Discord and to make something. And so over the past 2 years, that's kind of what we did. And then once it got to a point where we thought it was ready to show people, we're like, okay, let's let it loose on Kickstarter and see if people like it. And we've been really, really lucky. People seem to like it. So
yeah,
I mean, it's great. We should talk about the actual physical product. So when I first saw it, I noticed that there's like 3 levels. You've got your digital pledge level, then you got the box set, and then you've got the founder's pledge.
Yeah.
And I'll admit, the first moment I looked at it, I thought, that's kind of steep. $80 as your physical entry level. And I sat down and actually read what you get for your $80. And yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we, for those who are purists who just want the hardcover book, we have the hardcover book here. But the heart and soul of this game, what we've promised people is an out-of-the-box experience, right? Meaning everything you need is here. You don't need to be cracking open a bunch of rule books, referencing online material or whatever, even to the point where your powers, the player character's powers, are outlined and explained on their sheets. You don't have to open a rule book to know how your character works. All of that lives in the Ultimate Box Set level. So you're going to have, my gosh, kind of from the outwards in, it's going to be wrapped in this incredible collector's box. Faye, our incredible cover artist, illustrated that for us. It's dark, it's brooding, horrendous. I love it. You're going to have a copy of the hardcover core rulebook, right, which is spot UV glossed. It's incredible. You're going to have a set of battle maps keyed to the one-night adventures we've included in the core book, all illustrated in full color. You're going to have a set of miniatures. The miniatures were sculpted by Monster Fight Club. These guys are all stars. They've done Borderlands, Cyberpunk. They did The Witcher. I mean, talk about a track record. So they saw our illustrations and got excited. They said, "Hey, we'll give this to our sculptors," and they've done an amazing job. You're going to get a miniature for everyone in the party, and you're going to get the monster miniatures for all the other minions and nemesis and creepy crawlies. You're going to have a set of tokens, punch-out tokens. You can have 5 pre-generated character sheets, one for everyone. And then maybe one of the most exciting bits is you're going to have a set of custom Hellguard dice. So those were developed and designed, the dice, by Billy Gerritsen, an incredible artist, talented, who did our logo. He actually worked on the Castlevania logo, all sorts of cool stuff. So everything you need, period, is going to be in that box. If you wanted to kick it up a notch, you could go Founders tier, and Level Up Dice gets on board, and Campaign Coins gets on board. But really, at the Ultimate Box Set, you have everything you need.
Those coins as well are absolutely gorgeous.
Aren't those fun?
They're on the screen for those that are watching, obviously. Yeah.
All heavy metal, antique finish. Those are the guys that, so you guys know Campaign Coins. They've done stuff for Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and what have you. Of course, they are doing our class Emblem Coins, which are fun collectibles, but they're also initiative trackers. So.
But these are not like these are not small coins. These are not like,
No, these are 50 mil across and I think 3 mil thick. So they're pretty heavy duty.
They're basically, they are ranged weapons waiting. Well,
yeah,
even melee
shuriken
waiting to happen. Strap them to your knuckles. And yeah, so then you've got that founders tier, which gets you a couple of extra things. Those amazing coins, the level up dice. Most importantly, your name then goes in the product as well.
Yep, you can be part of our playtesting nation. We appreciate all the feedback too, and some really cool questions in the comments of the Kickstarter. So
awesome. Tell me about the world.
Ooh, oh,
Max,
okay.
I feel like you've practiced this, so I will allow you.
All right, let me get my. No, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version.
Put your cloak on for it.
600 exactly, my cloak and my hat, my fez up there. 665 years ago, there was a war with hell. Hell broke open and did battle with the kingdom of humanity on open field, right? And humanity won that war, barely. Okay, exactly, kind of a. Number one. So the losses were horrendous. It was a Pyrrhic victory. And Hell retreated, back into the depths. Never necessarily left the continent of Caina, but they lost that conflict. Now, hundreds of years later, Hell's returned. And it's learned lessons from that first conflict. It's not going to wage battle and war on open fields, all right? It's not going to march legions over the deserts of Caina. Now what Hell's doing is it's infecting humanity, right? It's influencing people's violent urges. Okay, it's seducing the weak-willed. It's infecting the local fauna, right? Twisting them into demons dangerous to man and beast alike, right? And so the descendants of these iconic warriors from that war long ago, right, have gathered together in these covenants, and they've set out wandering the continent of Caina, looking for this demonic influence, trying to root it out and crush it before it takes hold. And that's where we find ourselves today, as part of one of those wandering covenants of Hellguard, they call themselves. 5 descendants from these ancient bloodlines of heroes, and we're out there helping the innocent, sort of a la The Witcher, Geralt, moving from town to town and doing good, hopefully, using the power of hell against hell, and ideally, hopefully, leaving it better than they found it. So.
That's amazing. And as a deep anime cut, I think if I was playing this, I'd end up being more Trigun and less Witcher, just by nature of calamity.
But like Trigun, like Vash the Stampede, maybe it's all a ruse, right?
Could be. Or maybe you're just, resolving conflict by accident.
Me too.
Okay, so out of the box, as originally marketed, there are 5. It's set up
5 pre-generated adventures, 5 characters, you bet.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a narrative thread between them, or are they all standalone adventures that you could pick up and play with any group?
So they're tied by region, by history, but we did not want them to be part of a through-running campaign where we have these synopses and everyone's going to appeal differently to everyone else, right? So we wanted people to feel free and comfortable jumping into part 5, right? If that's what appealed to them. You can't say, well, you have a one-night game, right? We promise an incredible experience in 3 hours and then tell people, well, you have to start right here. It's like, no, you may not play it again for 6 months. So you darn well be able to do whatever you want. Yeah. You can jump into any of these and it's going to feel complete and horrendous on its own. So
awesome. So it's not really designed so much as, not that you couldn't do it this way, but for example, it's not really designed to be something that you might play every single day for a week, or that you might play throughout one entire day. You absolutely can do that, but that's not the intended design when you kind of sat down. More like, let's have a really, really cool, pulpy, anime and demonic fueled, kind of intense one shot, and it'd be super awesome. And then you really enjoy it, and then you don't get bored of it. And when you come back, it's a completely different story with a similar feel.
Precisely. I think that's a really good summation of it. Yeah.
So it's a bit like me playing Diablo. Then I'm an avid player of Diablo, and I've not played it in about 18 months. I bought a new mouse for it, and I still haven't played it.
Diablo mouse. There you go.
This is so cool.
Well, the good news is, they're all D6s in Hellguard. So if you don't play it for a couple months, you can use D6s anywhere.
Yeah,
they're pretty cool. So
that's true. And there are plenty of games out there that purely use D6s. So obviously this is a game that would be absolutely awesome around a table with some beers and some cheese flavored nachos and that sort of stuff. Cheese footballs. What are your thoughts on VTT? How do you think it would play online?
Well, my 2 cents. I mean, I think VTT, we've really had an unusual chance to explore it right over the last couple of years. The first thing we did when the world shut down, Mikael and I and our group of, we probably have maybe 30 people in our local group that rotate through. We set up a West Marches server, a digital West Marches server, and said, hey, we're going to stay connected. We're going to have adventures throughout this craziness, come what may. I think any horrific investigation that's more narratively driven shines on virtual tabletop, right? So we've certainly had the conversation. It's not off the table. It's a potentiality, right, for the future that we actually develop modules for the virtual tabletop platforms. We haven't done it yet. But I will tell you too, every playtest we ran for the first probably year, both with our team and outside of our team,
or something.
It's all on Roll20. You just threw the tokens down. It was just about tracking movement. Everything else was D6s, and it's simple enough. So
sure. Any thoughts on then maybe a Roll20 package further down the line? So
it's if people, if we have enough folks hop on board and there is the outcry, the support, we would be happy to explore it further. Yeah, it's certainly been something we talked about, and I think it would be worth it. Yeah.
And certainly for us, a lot of us ended up not even using Roll20 and just going full theater of the mind for a lot of our gaming. But you get such a different experience, don't you? And I think there's always a danger, particularly with more combat focused things, that the VTT will turn it into a literal strategy game.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When again you're counting the squares, and I think also it kind of detracts from learning the rules, which for some people is great because you can then focus on the story. But that one moment where your VTT fails and then you all sit around and go, I don't know how to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the nice part too is, as these characters, ideally, right, every horror investigation here for Heligard, it culminates in this horrific combat, right? This deadly, and it tends to be really fast-paced and chaotic and violent. You've backed hell into a corner, and now it's time to do the job, kill it, and it's all bets are off, right? That combat is not going to be a 90-minute ordeal, right? Like some D20 system, like some D20 system where you take 5 minutes to bluff your way past the guards, and then you take 5 hours to kill the 4 kobolds or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So
one hit point
even
at a time.
One at a time, and they have 1 hit point left. You're missing 40% of the time.
I was going to say that was a huge reason that we took sort of a roll to hit out of the game. We're like, nope, we've only got 3, maybe 3.5, 4 hours tops. Like, we don't have time for people to swing and miss, and for the game state to remain the exact same from one turn to the next. It has to change every time, even if it's somewhat incremental. And sometimes it's incremental, sometimes it's massive.
Because of course the flip side, right, is your abilities all work, you're rolling damage, but also the enemies are, and the initiative system is sort of like a popcorn system. So every player who takes a turn, the nemesis, the boss enemy, gets a turn, right? So you have a group of 5 people, that boss has taken 5 turns. It feels like it's throttling you. It's very oppressive, and so as a result, you have to respond rapidly. The popcorn initiative system means you're choosing who goes next on your team, right? You're not doing that second edition. I love D&D, but rolling initiative every round, it's no good for pacing. You're going to throw the initiative to your partner. So if you set up a combo or you scream, I need help, and you throw to the sage can start transposing enemies on the battlefield to save you right away. Right.
So is it the case that you, and maybe we should talk a little bit about the rules, but you as a player, you take your action and then you choose who goes next, or
that's it? Anyone chooses? You take your action, the enemy, boss, and 1 minion go next. But then you choose the next party member who goes. You bet.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. And it definitely we've found that it keeps people sort of constantly, or it keeps them way more engaged than they would be otherwise when they're like, well, I know my turn's not for another 5 minutes, so I'm going to go to the loo and come back.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Which is the word.
And do you have do you then have the concept of rounds and turns, or is it really just
you do only insofar as when you've all taken your turn? As you take your turn, you flip your token upside down. I've taken my turn this round, right? And then you reset. You're good to go again. So.
Awesome. That's amazing.
But we definitely try to do a lot to remove mental load and tracking, especially since we want this to be friendly to new players as well. So we didn't want them to be like, all right, cool, here's your 3 tokens, track what status effects are occurring simultaneously, but remember this one decays every round, and so.
Yeah, none of the status effects really last round to round. The decisions you're making are immediate and consequential, right? They have to do with the environment, the positioning, and setting up combinations more so than maximizing a status effect stack of 6. Well, he's ill, and then he's prone, and he's depressed, or whatever these.
And he's in debt, and
he's in debt. He's blind.
But will you stop talking about me, please? I feel like this is a personal attack.
It's an ad hominem attack.
Speaking of decay, as Mikael kind of hinted at earlier on. Now I picked up, and I have the PDFs. Can't wait for the books to arrive. Another role-playing game called Trophy, and there's a concept in Trophy of something called Ruin.
Yes.
Tell me what Ruin is in Hellguard.
Oh, I can tell you what Ruin is in Hellguard. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if I recall correctly, Ruin in Trophy kind of represents the way that the forest is sort of playing with your mind and your madness.
Yes.
In Hellguard, our ruin mechanic sort of reflects the state of hell's influence in the world around you.
I love
the way that
it
works
so much.
Yeah, and so the way that it works is that all of your powers, all of the magical abilities that you have, and every character has some degree of magic. Even the barbarian character, the breaker that we have, they have a bit of magic. all of that power, though, kind of is owed to the fact that your ancestors did war with hell, and that taint and that corruption lives on sort of generationally through you, and you're able to call on it to detect evil, to hunt it down, to exterminate it. However, using those abilities comes at a potential cost. When you call on the powers of hell, there is a chance that you might increase the amount of ruin that you've accumulated as well. And as ruin goes up, so too does the sort of the hostility of the world itself and the people that live in it. So a angry mob might be whipped into an even greater frenzy that you can't placate, and they might demand blood. They might demand your blood when they were originally after someone else. You might be at a feast, and the food that everyone is eating you discover has been poisoned or spoiled or corrupted somehow, or maybe even the prize stag that was at the center of the banquet rises to its feet and attacks people. So there are these sort of moments in the game where the GM will be called upon to roll for ruin, and the amount of ruin, which is entirely based on how much the players have been using and gambling with their powers, how much they've wanted to push their luck, will determine how much ruin there is and the likelihood that something even worse and even more disturbing may occur. And the best, one of my favorite parts too, is that that rune mechanic, even though we sort of have these two big phases of the game, we have the investigation that eventually culminates in combat if you're able to sort of find out who done it and hunt them down. The powers of hell persist well into combat, and the enemies that you fight are going to be stronger for the ruin that you've accumulated as well. They're going to either do more damage, or they'll have more health, or they may even unlock new abilities that they didn't have previously. So it's always
Sorry, go on.
Is there a way to make it better?
That's what I was going to ask. Is there a way to reduce ruin at the
It's
table?
all downhill in Caina all the time.
Yeah. So and given that every sort of adventure is sort of a bottle episode unto itself, you're always going to reset the ruin at the start of every game. But we wanted that dial to continually crank up and to never quite release. Like we want to build tension over the course of the evening, not diffuse it.
But then, of course, I guess the challenge as a GM is to ensure that your players are okay with that escalating amount of ruin, and they're not holding back. So that's the balance. And
absolutely.
I think sometimes just reminding your party that this is a one shot, so just have fun.
Have
fun. If you die, it's fine. You're going to be magically fine next episode. Don't worry about it.
That's exactly it. This
is an otherworld scenario. This was a different Torvald the Breaker, a different Realm of the Witch. You're fine.
Tell me about how the combat works.
Oh, you bet. It's simple. It's fun, right? So it's going to be played out on a grid. You know, at our hearts, we're still tactical gamer nerds, right? So we love moving miniatures around and painting them and all that fun stuff.
I can't wait to paint these things, by the way.
Oh my God! Did you see Angel Giraldes actually just painted a miniature for us, and we posted it.
That was
I think today. Oh, mind blowing what that guy can do! My gosh,
it's visible on the Kickstarter. They're doing a slower rollout over on his platform though.
Yeah,
but it looks incredible
in a couple days. So
really
anyway, you're gonna have the party members positioned out, you know, on typically an 11x17 illustrated full color map, right? We like the 11x17. It's large enough that you have freedom of choice, right? But small enough. I mean, at a certain point, everything feels like an open field, and you're spending more time running than you are fighting. So.
Sure.
And these are more like encounter maps than big battle maps too.
Yeah.
So.
Precisely. So immediately, depending on the ruin score, either you will go first or the demons from hell will go first. It typically is consisted of a nemesis, the big horrendous boss that you've been tracking down his influence over the investigation, and a bunch of minions. Say the good guys go first, you'll sort of look at each other and point at somebody. They'll take their turn. Typically, you have 2 action points. And you're going to use those 2 action points, expend them to do maneuvers, right? And you have X number of maneuvers on your sheet. They're all explained on the sheet, so you don't need to crack open any rule books. Everyone has a speed rating, which allows them to move across the battlefield. No attacks of opportunity, you know, no status effects, no prone, no whatever. And then, of course, you're just going to start to go round robin, right? Torvald might use his combination to hook somebody in or several people in. And then do this big 360-degree whirlwind, and then the enemy will take a turn. The enemy's turn, the big nemesis, we wanted to lift some of the load of decision-making off of the game master, right? So rather than the game master having to do that odd calculus where you say, well, am I going to be a jerk and gank the mage, right? Or, am I going to be maybe more charitable and spread my attacks out? The game master is going to roll a d6 to determine what in the world the nemesis does. Okay, and from there, the battle's on, right? So you might have a huge stomping effect that affects everybody tremendously within 3 squares or whatever. You might grab one of the good guys and charge them across the map, separate them from their friends, smash them into a wall, do some environmental damage, and then one of the minions is activated every turn as well, and the GM gets to decide which minion. So what that allows us to do is, if you have stragglers in the background, you have long range PCs and archers and mages and whatever, the game master can be consistently activating minions. So if that zombie took an action this turn, there's nothing that stops him from taking an action next turn again. Okay, if the game master decides we need to put some pressure on the mage in the corner, and then you're going to go around the robin until one of the sides is deceased, and you're good to go.
And we found that randomizing the sort of the big bad guy, the nemesis's abilities, allowed us to be a little more savage and to not be as sort of conservative with how cruel and brutal it can be. Right. Because we're like, hey, it's randomized. No one's at fault for the fact that this force of nature has decided to do tons of damage to one person.
And each of these characters, each of the Hellguard has sort of an internal loop built into it. We wanted it to be about setting up combos internally, yourself and also with your allies. So for instance, Amelia the Sage, right? This incredibly powerful battle mage woman. She can transpose herself with enemies, right? And you can see her art's incredible. She's holding the stuff of the void. She's a master of star magic and arcane fire, and you can see that sort of across her costume. She can transpose herself with the enemy. And at first glance, you go, well, that's kind of fun. But if you think about it, if she does that 2 or 3 times in a turn, she can stack groups of enemies together. And then her big move is to drop a fireball on top of them.
Nice.
Right. So she might use her power to swap with an ally to get them out of trouble, or to reposition groups of smaller minions together for these devastating fireballs. You have Kezia the Shadow, right, who's a master assassin, ranger, rogue, scout, diplomat in some ways. She has the ability to control supernatural darkness, right? So the shadows will obey her command. She can step into a dark portion of the map and reappear on another dark portion. And every time she kills an enemy, she's fed action points, right? She sort of sups on their life force, and that continues her string of attacks. So while you might have Amelia the Sage or Torvald the Breaker do devastating, huge area effect damage, she's going to be running around as cleanup crew. Okay, you can have a really radical turn with Kezia the Shadow, where she might pick off 3 or 4 or 5 enemies at once, boom, 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 darting across the map, sort of like a Nightcrawler or something like that.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just reading earlier on about Torvald. You very kindly sent me a couple of glimpses of what we can expect. Would you mind if I just read out the Molten Hook?
Please.
Oh, yeah. By all means.
Go right ahead.
So this is a combat ability. Are you calling them abilities? I can't recall.
Combat talents,
whatever,
yeah.
You throw a chained hook of searing hellfire, dragging your victim into your deadly grip. Mechanically, move an enemy within 5 squares of you into a square adjacent to you and deal 2d6 damage to it. I mean, so from a rule set perspective, that's really good, very clean, very obvious.
Simple. Yeah.
But I love the I'm trying to think right, but the way that you articulate this, the thrill of battle stokes the hellfire in your blood, driving you into a berserker's frenzy. Bloody awesome.
Oh, this is entirely a vestige, I think, of 2 things. Both Max and I grew up playing Magic the Gathering, and the flavor text on those cards were some of our favorite things to this day. And then in D&D 3.5, they released the spell compendium, which for every spell in there had like a beautiful little quick description in italics of what the cinema of that attack was supposed to look like. And we wanted to replicate that on this sheet as much as possible to sort of give people, again, as much flavor and theme with as little load as we could. And the
It's
beautiful
so
thing
cool.
about the Molten Hook as well is that even though it does 2d6 damage there, the passive ability that you have makes it so that you do more damage to people. The more people, the greater the number of people in melee with you there are, the more damage you do. So even adding that one person, if there's 2 other people by you, you're now doing 2d6 plus 3 damage, not just 2d6 flat.
Damn. So really, but then I guess you would have potentially more enemies to fight as well. So it all balances out and just feels even more.
Definitely a balancing act.
It's a good thing he has a lot of hit
But
points.
constantly, one of the goals is that the ante is upped. The stakes are increased through combat. We have this effect sometimes in a lot of contemporary systems, whereas where the party members, as they get more wounded, as they get closer to death, they get more timid. They get more afraid. They don't want to lose their character, so they start to pull back. Which, if you think about classic action flicks, Errol Flynn or whatever they are, The Princess Bride, as the stakes increase, the heroes get bolder and braver, and they take more risks, and they do incredible things, right?
Yeah, it's
so
true.
We wanted to flip that on its head, all the way to the point where every party member, every Hellguard has what we call a Hell Breach ability. Okay, so historically, you'll have Torvald's molten scars, right? So the breakers, not to lore dump, but the breakers inherit the scars of their ancestors. That's their curse from the war, right? So when they received a horrendous wound, their children, their descendants would display that wound on their person. So you see a breaker, they call them broken ones, sort of as a sobriquet, right? They might walk through the town looking like mangled people, right? The sign that their lineage participated in great and terrible conflicts. As the breakers get closer to death, these scars start to glow with a molten heat, right? And their rage increases. Right? They're the shock troops of the war on Caina here. So when a breaker dies, they get an additional whirlwind attack. Everybody adjacent to a breaker as he dies, right, is in terrible danger, right? Their scars are going to erupt in hellfire. They're going to get one final hurrah.
Does that include friendlies?
That does not include friendlies now. No, we were not that
as
brutal.
written.
Not as written. We'll see what happens.
I guess it's up to
playtesting is still going to, we are going to have a playtesting period for the Founders Tier people for a while. And if we find that there is a large outcry where they're like, you know what, this would be pretty great. Like we're pushovers. We'll see what happens.
Gwyn the Knight, likewise, right? As a knight, who are these battlefield commanders and sort of diplomats, as they start to get wounded and they're falling on the field, they would need to be symbols of hope, right, to their bannermen. So you'll see a knight starts to glow with this sort of holy radiance. Wings might sprout from their back, and you see a halo. When a knight falls, they're literal martyrs, right? So their allies are healed as a knight dies. So you're in these key moments incentivized to take the risk, even if it means you're giving up your own life, right, for one last radical moment here on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think of all the Hell Breaches, Brahms is probably my favorite. Brahm the Witch. When Brahm dies, and this is in some ways a lore thing as well. The witches in Caina are sort of more like your sort of chilling adventures of Sabrina, Salem, Penny Dreadful. They're kind of like Luciferian witches in a sort of diabolical, if you will. And so the witches have signed contracts with 13 traitor demon kings, and they don't know what happens to their souls after death. And so Brahm, upon dying, terrified of what might happen to him, will actually attempt with his spirit to lash out and possess the body of another creature. He does 3d6 damage to the nearest minion. If it kills that minion, and there's a chance that it could, 3d6 is a lot to a minion, he gets the ability to possess its body for the remainder of combat until it dies. And so death isn't even necessarily the end, at least for that character. So they all have very, very neat abilities that sort of make it okay to die, because you get to go out in a big splashy way and reinforce the lore and the themes that we have in the game.
And I presume that the idea is that your characters are most likely only going to die during that end game big climax fight. So it's just going to make that fight even more exciting.
Absolutely.
And you kind of want that thing to happen, right? So you might even push your character to die when you know that there's 2 or 3 things left on the battlefield, just because they're so close anyway, and you want to see what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And the way that the danger ratchets up leading up to combat isn't going to necessarily be through hit point taxes or anything like that, like we've seen with some other games, but it's instead going to be through the ruin mechanic and the way that it just makes the world more and more dangerous, and the way that it is going to later affect combat as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's quite a lot to take in. How do you? Well, I'm getting to this. How do you envisage this for newbie role players?
It sounds like a lot, but when we compare it with most systems out there, right, at first level in some of the popular ones, you're making decisions in relation to 6 ability scores and maybe 20 skills and a feat, and then a race, and then a class, and then an oath, and then a weapon, and then an armor, and then items, right?
Trying to keep all that in your head.
Try to keep all this from your head, and make sure you do it in the 30 minutes before you play, right? Because you didn't, you didn't know this is what you had to do. Right, you're going to end up taking 2 hours and then playing for 45 minutes, right? This is modeled more after a convention experience, right? You have that moment at a convention where you sit down at the table. There are the pre-gens out there with great art, and 5 hands slap down. Bap, 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 that's mine. Like I call this guy, right? We wanted something more akin to that. So all that work is removed. The characters are pre-generated. They're flavorful. The abilities are described on the sheet. So the GM, you never have that moment where you reference page 250, right? The GM can reliably say, hey, how does it work? It says right there, and point to your sheet, right? From there, it's all easy. This is a game running experience with minimal prep. Any investigation, any mystery, you want to read it in advance, right? You want to be familiar with it, but it's all node based, right? There are no bottlenecks in the mystery portion, the investigation portion. That moment where you miss one knowledge check and then nothing makes sense for 3 hours, right?
That's just me generally.
That's me too. That's the problem. So, every clue can be uncovered in a multitude of ways, a multitude of approaches. It can even be moved if necessary, but the story should never cease, and that's what we've seen with the game. So, and
what with you having all that information on the character sheets as well, I can imagine that it's also going to be pretty approachable for new games masters as well.
Absolutely, that was one of the goals, right? We look out there, and Mikael and I have talked about this many times. One of our goals in doing this is to improve the quality of people's games. Whether it's this system or outside, we have an amazing team that's contributed some great articles, some great writing for the book, ourselves included, about running one-shots, running horror games. It's all system agnostic, a lot of that stuff. You can apply it to your VTM, your Call of Cthulhu, your Shadows of Esther, your Alien, whatever you have.
I have all of those over there.
Yeah.
I'm pointing to the shelf to my right-hand side. And some of those I've even played or run.
Just a couple.
And the other ones I've invested far too much money in.
The other they're beautiful art books. They're artifacts.
They are beautiful art books.
And the team, it comes back to the team too. We're spoiled in the team that's rallied around this. So.
Absolutely.
The artwork is absolutely gorgeous, and I really do love the juxtaposition between your big bads and your heroes, which I kind of alluded to in the intro. I'll try not to remember that intro. But I really do.
I loved it. Okay.
But I really adore the way that if you just take any 2 of those images, you wouldn't necessarily imagine them to be in the same game. Between your heroes and your villains, and that's really great. One of the questions that we got from one of our friends on our Discord, link down below, is around your scenarios and whether or not you imagine there to be more than 5 scenarios. So let's segue on to the campaign as it currently stands at recording, what the plans are for that campaign as it grows in success, which it will, and any future plans that you might have for the franchise, presuming it will be one.
Well, we're pretty lucky, fortunately, and again, we're spoiled with the support. We're already funded. We're successful, right? So we are going to have Hellguard on the tables, worldwide here. We've already mapped out the next few stretch goals. Of course, the one we're creeping up on is some incredible fiction by one of our favorite authors, Richard Lee Byers. He's written, of course, for Warhammer and Marvel and World of Darkness and Forgotten Realms and all these incredible IPs, right? So he's going to open up with a wonderful short story for us to get people into the Hellguard mood and the headspace. Directly following that, the illustrious B. Dave Walters, right, is on board. He's going to be contributing a bonus adventure. So exactly what you asked about.
Yeah,
It's an additional adventure. Yep. Just a couple, just a couple little things, right?
Here and there.
And of course, that adventure is going to come with additional tokens and art, right, and another battle map, and all sorts of things. We have more in the works. We have additional adventures outlined, some of them written from some incredible contributors here on the team. And we'll just have to see how the remainder of the Kickstarter goes. But we're eager to get this into everyone's hands. So
yeah, and in the event that I mean, we're going to have at least these 5 pre-written adventures. And if you play through all those and you love them and you want more, we will be giving storytellers tools to create their own as well. We're going to sort of provide story hooks, and we're going to have a bestiary as well, full of additional demons and hellspawn that you can kind of throw in and mix and match, or take what you like and leave what you don't. So there's going to be tools and options to allow people, once they've run sort of the 5 pre-written adventures, or heck, if they want to do it first and make their own thing, by all means, you have our infernal blessing to do so. There will be resources for enterprising storytellers to come up with their own stuff.
Are there any plans for resources for character generation as well? Or is
yes,
that's a little bit more tricky, I think.
Oh man, did we go back and forth on character creation? Because in some ways, when I think about a role-playing game, someone's like, Mikael, what's a role-playing game? I'm like, well, it's a game where you make your own character. And it's something that is, and one of the fun things with the professional relationship that Max and I have is that Max runs a lot of games and I play in a lot of games, and so the intersection of our viewpoints allows us to have sort of like his top-down view and then my in the trenches sort of perspective, where I'm looking around at the other players at the table at their level. And so when it comes to character creation, though, we knew that, even 15 to 30 minutes of time building out a character and seeing all the other possibilities that you could pursue, but choose not to. Like, there's a lot of, picking one pre-generated character out of 5 is more than enough initial decision making that you have to make, because we want people to be really hooked into what's happening in the story at the table. That being said, we will definitely provide a rough outline for how people can further customize their Heligard if they want to, what sort of changes that they can make, where the sort of rough sort of boundaries are that we've found as we've explored, like, don't exceed this number of dice, like, be aware of the action economy, like, this is what's considered this powerful and this is what's this powerful, these should not be any more powerful than this, and so on. Like, consider how ruin interacts with this. So there's definitely going to be guidelines and advice, but by default, that's not necessarily how we're going to be approaching it this time around. That being said, I would love to add more pre-generated characters. I'd love to have a robust character creation system, but it's all ultimately in the hands of the backers and the playtesters, and what is feasible for this project and what makes sense for it.
That makes perfect sense. And to be honest with you, I've certainly found, and I don't know if, I guess, being as Mikael doesn't ever run anything by the sound of things, Max, you probably recognize this. I'm such a dick. I'm sorry.
I have run games. Thank you. It's been 5 years, but I have.
But when you're writing a one-shot and you're tailoring your characters around that one-shot, it's actually really time-consuming and quite complicated to get it right, so that all your characters have really useful abilities without it feeling like, oh, my character's only got this ability, so they have this one trick for this one scene within this story. So I feel like character generation might be something that's really more useful for the GM in this specific game than maybe for your players. So you can actually create your new story and then add some new characters that might exist within that story. So cool.
Yeah, when a character like Amelia has the ability to pick up an object, detect its emotional resonance and the name of the person who last held it, that means that we can litter every adventure with meaningfully held objects in a way that we can't necessarily do if there's some other ability that's unaccounted for.
Yeah. And then you just have that player going around basically going, why?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Why are we in the desert? I'm playing a pirate.
Thank you so much. This game is so exciting. I'm really pleased that it exists and that it's being successful. I can't wait to get it to my table. We're definitely going to be behind it, and I'd love to get a one shot or something similar onto our show at some point when we have the words in front of us.
That sounds great.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And thank you for having us. This has been a total blast. We
love talking about this stuff. So welcome. Yeah. So, guys, if you've enjoyed this show, then please hit like, please subscribe, please check out Hellguard. The link to the Kickstarter will be down below. Just check it out. Check out the video; it's amazing, and give the product some love. Max, Mikael, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Talk to you soon.
Take care, everyone, and until next time, I hope your dice rolls are way better than mine. Ciao, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.